So, the book of Job is a difficult book to explain. It's probably the oldest book in the Bible. Job was written approximately 4,000 years ago. So just let that sink in for a moment. 4,000 years ago. Very old book. The time of the book sort of overlaps with the book of Genesis. And so if you have any question as to how old the book is, it's not too hard to correlate it to the book of Genesis. Job himself is described as being from the land of Uz. We're told in verse 1 of chapter 1. There's a couple of thoughts on where this is. It could be somewhere in the Middle East. Some people think it's around Edom, where the Edomites are or were, which would be south, just south and just east of the Dead Sea. And so it's possible from that we determine that Job himself is a Gentile or an Edomite. And we can read about it in Genesis 22:21, if you want to. We'll be going back and forth for a minute here. Genesis 22:21 says, Uz, his firstborn, and Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram. So we get a reference to Uz there in the book of Genesis. And so we see the correlation, the overlap. Eliphaz, one of Job's three friends who are going to come to counsel him. Eliphaz is a Temanite, and we read about the Temanites in Genesis 36:11. Let's see. Fingers aren't too nimble this morning. 36:11, the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, and Gatam, and Kenaz. And so you read about Eliphaz the Temanite there. Bildad the Shuhite, Genesis 25:2. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. So there's the Shuhite. And Zophar, the Naamathite, we don't really have a record of him or that lineage. But Job's younger friend, who's going to come to him after these other three friends, Elihu, is a Buzite, and we read about him in Genesis 22:21 as well, the Buzites. So you can see historically the same names, the same culture, the same time frame overlaps with the book of Genesis. And so we know when Genesis was written, and so in the time period that it covers, and so this is wisdom literature, though. This is not necessarily historical in the sense of being narrative. It is considered wisdom. So what is the purpose of the book of Job? It's kind of to explain that when faced with suffering, the appropriate response of the righteous man is not to seek from God the reasons for his suffering, but rather to fear God and trust him implicitly in the midst of suffering in this life. That's a mouthful, but the bottom line is it doesn't answer the question, why do the righteous suffer, but it explains how the righteous should suffer, if that makes sense. Okay, it doesn't give us the answer. It never does as to why God would allow suffering of a righteous individual. And chapters 1 and 2, in particular, establish the fact and the truth that Job is a righteous man. 3 times in the first 2 chapters, Job is described as a blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil kind of guy. He is a righteous man. And theologically, we would say that when a person is declared righteous by God, he is what? This is the doctrine of justification. He is declared righteous. God himself declares righteous the man Job. Look at verse 8. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Look at chapter 2, verse 3. Same thing. There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. So God himself declares Job righteous on the basis of his faith. Okay? That is justification. He is justified. He is declared righteous. So he has not done anything to deserve what he's going to get. Right? This is not payback. This is not God chastising him. This is not God punishing him. He's a righteous man. He's done nothing wrong. He has not sinned. So why does he suffer? Well, somehow in the purposes of God, it's to refine him. It's to use evil for God's sole purposes of growing this man in his faith. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It's just like the book of James, right? God doesn't tempt people to evil, but he does test them. And that's the reality. And the testing of their faith produces holiness. And so that's what this book does. It puts Job to the test. And this guy is in pain. I mean, he's in anguish. If you read chapter 3, right, he wants to kill himself, or worse than that, he kind of wishes he had never been born. He even says in chapter 3, if I had been born, why couldn't I have been stillborn? Or why don't I just die now and get it over with? Right? That's his thinking. This man is depressed. He's going to lose everything. He's a wealthy man, and he has a big family, and he seems to be happy, and he's righteous, and yet it all gets taken away from him. And I got to tell you, this book hits home for me in so many ways. Just trying to understand suffering and what we go through in this life and how it relates to what God is doing in our lives. It really hits home if you stop and think about it, right? Sometimes evil happens in our lives. Sometimes things that we look at and see as bad happen. And yet somehow we have to wisely pursue God's purposes in it. And that's the message of the book of Job. Now, what else do we know about chapters 1 and 2? Where is all of this taking place? It's all up in the heavenly realm, right? So we're given a picture of the throne room of God where decisions that are going to affect Job's life are being made without his knowledge. And that kind of establishes as well God's purposes. Here we're allowed into the chamber of the Most High as he's making decisions about this man's life. Who else is there? Satan is there, and who else?
Sons of God, probably angels.
Angels, that's right, probably the sons of God. Now, interestingly, a lot of people try to correlate this to Genesis 6, right? The sons of God. It's a scant phrase that's used in the Old Testament, but what does it say about these sons of God in verse 6? It says, they came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Is there anywhere in there that says these sons of God are fallen angels? No, see, that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty of why it doesn't correlate to Genesis 6. Genesis 6 is not talking about angels, it's talking about sons of God, and it's talking about the fact that they're committing these evil things about taking the daughters of men and intermarrying with them, but it doesn't say anywhere that they're angels. So we can't take this term from the book of Job, the use of sons of God here, and import it back over to Genesis, because they're talking about, number one, two different contexts, but number two, it doesn't say anywhere in here that these sons of God are fallen angels. It just says the sons of God came to present themselves before God, and who came with them? The fallen angel, Satan. So he's the only one that we know of at this point that has fallen. So you can't use this text to correlate Genesis 6. That's the point. They're not necessarily fallen angels. So what's happening here? In the entirety of the book, we're let into the throne room of God in the beginning, and we're told about Job's afflictions in chapters 1 and 2. And look at your chart there. Then in the center of the book, these dialogues. So you have disaster at the beginning. In the middle of the book, you have these dialogues in chapters 3 to 41. And then you have his deliverance at the end of the book in chapter 42. And so the book is presented as what's known as a chiasm. We've talked about this before. A chiasm kind of focuses in on a center of something. And so you see that Job is afflicted in the beginning, but he's prospered at the end. You see Job's first response, his lament, in chapter 3, and then you see Job's response in chapter 42. So those two things bracket each other. And then you get these three cycles of debate with his friends, right, in 4 to 27. And then you get Job's three major speeches over in 29 to 41. And then in the center of the book is the wisdom poem, verse 28, or chapter 28. And that's really what this is all about, is trying to understand the wisdom of God and human wisdom in light of who God is, right? The purposes of God in suffering of the righteous. And so that's really what this is all about. He is, as I said, a Gentile. So we also see God at work in the life of a Gentile, which is also weird, right? But this is before the Mosaic covenant, so it would have to be, right? Abraham was a Gentile when he was called, right? So the chiastic structure of the book, you see under that chart there, places an emphasis upon the wisdom poem at the heart of the book. There's a wisdom of God that no amount of knowledge, understanding, or study can give us. And that's where we just have to say, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief, right? I don't know. I don't have the answer. And when people are suffering, and I deal with this all the time because I'm a hospice chaplain, why are they suffering? We don't know. That's the reality. I don't know. But somehow, in some way, God is at work. See, Job has in chapters 1 and 2, how much knowledge does Job have of what's going on up there in heaven? 0. His friends that come to talk to him, how much knowledge do they have of what's going on up in heaven? 0, right? These decisions that are being made that affect Job's lives are being made completely apart from any knowledge that he has of it. Just stop and think about that for your own life, right? The things that happen to you, being of divine design, you haven't got a clue. And so how do you take the scriptures and apply them to your life? It just takes wisdom. It just takes wisdom. And a lot of it, and seeking the Lord by faith, and trying to understand what he has for you in it. But it's all subjective, because you don't know. And we can look back on things, and we can say, gee, I can see what God was doing in my life back then, right? From my perspective now, I can look back and say, wow, that was a great time of growth for me, even though I was suffering terribly. But when we're going through it, nobody else has any idea either. And so this is also for you if you're one of those people that said, well, if somebody's going through something horrible and you say, well, gee, I don't know, God must be chastising you for something you've done. Don't ever be that person, right? Because you don't have any idea. You just don't. See, human wisdom is attainable. This is the wisdom of Proverbs, lady wisdom, calling out in the streets. Remember we talked about this last week, compared to the foolish woman who lurks in the darkness and tries to ensnare people. Her steps lead down to Sheol and to death, but the righteous woman shouts from the tops of the roofs, right? She's out in the open. Lady wisdom. And she is attainable. She's attainable. You can have wisdom in this life when you seek God, but the knowledge of what God is doing, that lies with him. So the answer is you're trying to figure out, as I said, not why we suffer, but how to go through the suffering, right, in a godly way. The wisdom of the book of Job is a higher wisdom, one that's unattainable for man. And I'm mindful of Deuteronomy 29:29, right? The secret things belong to the Lord our God. But what has been revealed belongs to us and our generations after us, right? There are things that have been revealed and there are things that have not been revealed. Things that the Lord keeps to himself. And we have to be okay with that. It's because we need to grow in faith. Right? So Job is a blameless and upright man who feared God, turned away from evil. He continued to worship and trust God despite these extreme testings. And they were extreme. I mean, if you look at chapter 1, right? Verse 13. On the day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans attacked and took them. They also slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, talk about a bad day, right? Another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them and slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So in one day, in one swoop, Job loses everything. All of his livestock, all of his family, everything, except his wife. Right? He still has his wife, and he still has these servants who came to tell him about it. But if that wasn't enough, then you get over to chapter 2, and his health is taken away from him, right? He's, verse 7, Satan smote Job with sore boils. The Hebrew here would give you the idea of evil eruptions, if you have any idea of what they must have been like. They were evil eruptions from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, his whole body covered in boils. And he's so miserable, he takes a piece of broken pottery and he tries to scrape the boils to get some relief while he's sitting among the ashes of everything he owned. Right? And then his supportive wife says to him, what? Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Why don't you curse God and die? I mean, she sees he's in misery, but look at the end of verse 10. I mean, if he rebukes his wife, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks, right? Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. That's the refrain, and we read that over in chapter 1, verse 22 as well. Through all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Now, what's the first thing that happens to people when they get into difficulties? Who do they blame? It's the first thing they do. They think God is doing this. I mean, God has allowed this in my life for some reason, and God is tempting me. That's what the book of James is about, right? These people are saying that God is tempting them to evil. Well, God doesn't tempt anybody. James says, your own lusts carry you away, right? So the man is completely defeated. Everything stripped away, including his health. And he still doesn't curse God. He still holds fast to his faith. He does not sin in his words. And so, as I said, Job is a righteous man. He is a faithful man. And so his friends come, these 3 friends, they come and they sit with him for 7 days, which is good. You know, weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, that's good. But then they unload on him their view of cosmic justice. And that's really where this book takes a turn is that we know Job is righteous, but his friends somehow try to blame something he's done as why he deserves this punishment, right? You've done something to deserve this. You must have. We know it. And that's the idea here. And you see under the theology of Job's friends and Job himself at the beginning of the book hold to a doctrine of cosmic justice in which God judges the wicked with suffering and the righteous live peacefully and healthy. Right? It's the prosperity gospel. Health and wealth. If you serve God, if you do right, you will be blessed, right? God will bless you. You will become rich. You will become wealthy. You will be healthy, right? It's the health and wealth gospel of the Old Testament. But is that the reality? See, God has other purposes in testing people that we don't know about. And so sometimes he puts us through tests to refine us. And the doctrine, in a sense, is true, but it's not completely true. It's not the whole story. God allows suffering to come to the world and upon the righteous, and only he knows and understands the entire purpose for such suffering. And part of the problem is that they are arguing from effect to cause rather than from cause to effect, right? They're trying to work backwards. And they're trying to say, listen, we see what's happened, Job, so we know you must have done something to deserve it. And you can't know. You can't know. There are cases where the righteous suffer, and you can't know the reason why. So we are told from the beginning, Job has done nothing. He's done nothing to deserve this. And yet, it's all come in his way. Now, down at the bottom, it says what we see is, much of what they say is true, but they're wrong in what they say. Thus, we need to read it discerningly. They're an example of spiritual decay. They're the Pharisees of Job's day, right? They judge without having knowledge, which is a terrible thing to do to people. Don't ever be the one that's judging somebody's life situation when you don't have any idea what God is doing in their life. Don't be that person. Be the one that's compassionate, merciful, gracious, kind, right? Isn't that what God is like? Display the character of God rather than self-righteousness and a hateful spirit. So ultimately, these three friends are not friends at all, they're judges. And as we go through the debates here, I want to point out what their arguments are along the way so that you can see kind of where they're at in their thinking. See, Eliphaz, the first one to talk, he sort of teaches that experience teaches us that sin leads to suffering. So if you sin, you're going to suffer. Bildad, the second one that's going to come and talk with him, says tradition teaches that sin leads to suffering, so you must be sinning in some way. So he argues from tradition. Eliphaz argues from experience. And Zophar teaches that religion is the culprit. Religion teaches that sin leads to suffering, so you are sinning. Elihu, the sophomoric, the younger, wiser man that's going to come in after these three, Sophomoric means a wise moron, by the way. Sophos and moros is a wise moron. He's a young friend of Job. He teaches God purifies and teaches the righteous. And he rebukes Job for his own self-righteousness. See, Job is arguing all the way, I have not sinned, I have not sinned, I have not sinned. And somewhere along the way, he hits the argument of defending his own self-righteousness and saying, I am a good guy, right? I am a righteous man. And so pride kicks in, and he defends himself so much that he ends up sinning in his own self-righteousness. And we find out that that's what God was after all along, was to carve that out of him. Right? So we've talked about chapters 1 and 2, Job's afflictions. So chapters 3 to 37 cover Job's wise friend's counsel, right? So chapter 3, Job is really in a lament. He's depressed. He's lost everything. And so, as I said, the first one up, Eliphaz's first speech starts in chapter 4. And Eliphaz's argument here is from experience. And as I said, sin leads to suffering. If you sin, you will suffer. And Eliphaz urges humility and repentance. So verse 7 of chapter 4, remember now, whoever perished being innocent? Or where were the upright destroyed? According to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. Right? This is the sowing and the reaping principle. You sow sin and iniquity, you are going to harvest trouble. So you must have sinned somewhere. And so if you sin, you suffer. That's the argument, yes. And that's a true statement. That is a true statement. But what was wrong is he was assuming that that's what Job was suffering. Exactly. Yeah, without knowledge of what is really going on in the heavenly decisions that have been made, he's assuming that what is going on is a direct result of something Job must have done. And he's arguing, as I said, from experience. Listen, I've seen this a lot in life. When people sin, they suffer. There you go. Boom. Right? Slam dunk. Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, so you can't make it a reciprocal statement.
Yeah.
If you sin, you will suffer, but just because you're suffering doesn't mean that you have sinned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. So, verse 17, can mankind be just before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? Good questions, right? Good questions. Chapter 5, verse 7, man is born for trouble as sparks fly upward. But here's his answer, verse 11. So he sets on high those who are lowly. So if you humble yourself, he will exalt you. That's not wrong, right? James says that over in chapter 4. But we don't know that Job has done anything wrong at this point. As Thomas said, it's not a reciprocal. Just because he's suffering, it doesn't mean that he's sinned. Verse 18, he inflicts pain and gives relief. He wounds and his hands also heal. So that's a truism about God. He is the one who inflicts pain, but he is also the one who heals. And that's said about his dealings with the nation of Israel, right? He who wounded Israel as a nation would be the one to heal them as a nation as well.
And also, verse 17 was right before 18. Behold,
Yeah.
how happy is the man whom God reproves, and do not despise the discipline of the Almighty.
Yeah.
It's kind of all part of that big picture of how God gets things done.
Yeah. Yeah, God uses providence and sovereignty, and happy is the man whom God reproves, right? If God is disciplining you, it's a sign or evidence of sonship. And you should be happy about it, right? Even though it's not happy to go through the suffering at the time, it's good to know that God is at work in your life and disciplining you as a father disciplines a son whom he loves, right? Hebrews 12. So Job's reply to all this in chapter 6 is, I haven't sinned, right? I'm in anguish. He questions the trials and he asks for sympathy, right? Verse 20, have I sinned? Chapter 7, verse 20, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target? I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't sinned. I don't understand. And believe me, I'd be sitting there thinking the same thing. What have I done to deserve this? Right? I don't deserve this. That would be my thought. I don't know about you, but if I lost everything, I'd probably be sitting there thinking the same thing. In fact, I was watching Little House on the Prairie last night. Okay? And Charles's friend, Jonathan Garvey, his wife, Alice, died in the School for the Blind in the house fire, right? So he loses his wife, and she was holding the baby of Mary Ingalls when she died in the fire. And so Mary lost her baby as well. And there's all these people mourning and burying their loved ones in this tragic thing of a house fire. And I was thinking to myself, these people have lost so much, so painful. Wouldn't you be thinking, I mean, what have I done to deserve this? How do I move on from this, right? This is tragic. And the answer is you have to seek God's purposes in it. You have to trust God, right? He loves you. He's a good God. You may not know why, but as my wife says, you know the who, right? You don't know the why, but you know the who of who is doing this and why. You may not ever get an answer, but the who is a God who loves you and who is kind and merciful and gracious and compassionate, abounding in loving kindness. That's the God who's doing this, and so you can trust that he has your best in mind and that somehow through the tragedy, God is going to bring glory to himself. And that's a hard place to get sometimes. So Bildad's first speech comes next, and Bildad in chapter 8 says, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert what is right? So he accuses Job of impugning God. And he says in verse 5, if you would seek God and implore the compassion of the Almighty, if you're pure and upright, surely now he would rouse himself for you and restore your righteous estate. Right? What a friend. Right? What a friend. You're in sin and you need to crawl out of that sin, humble yourself before God, and seek his mercy to be put in a righteous estate again. And then verse 8, Please inquire of past generations and consider the things searched out by their fathers. For we are only of yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are as a shadow. And again, his argument is from tradition, right? Sin leads to suffering, so the answer is you must be sinning. You must be sinning in some way, right? Or this wouldn't be happening to you. And so Job's response to Bildad comes in chapter 9 through chapter 10, and Job admits he's not perfect, but it seems all right to protest what seems unfair to him. I'm being treated unfairly here, and it's okay if I protest against it. That's kind of the argument here, right? This is all so unfair. I don't deserve this. Chapter 9, verse 32, for he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, that we may go to court together. Right? I can't sue him for what he's done. He's God, and I'm not. Chapter 11, you get Zophar's first speech. So again, we're getting this round of speeches here. Each one's going to take a jab at it, and Job's going to respond to each one, and then they're going to take a second stab at it and try to answer it. So Zophar's first speech, he says, religion teaches that sin leads to suffering, so you must be sinning. And verse 13 of chapter 11, if you would direct your heart right and spread out your hand to him, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. And do not let wickedness dwell in your tents. Get right with God, and the suffering will stop. So that's his solution. Chapter 12, Job's response to Zophar. Verse 5, he who is at ease holds calamity and contempt, as prepared for those whose feet slip. Right? So Job's response to Zophar and friends, you're wrong. You're all wrong. Only God really knows, and I will hopefully speak to him someday about it. That's a big hope, right? I want to see God face to face, and I want to talk to him about this. I demand justice. This is not fair. Chapter 13, verse 3, I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue with God, but you smear with lies. You are all worthless physicians. You don't know what ails me. You don't know why this is happening. I want to talk to God, and I want to talk to God now. See, the arrogance starting to build, right? The self-righteousness starting to build. I don't deserve this. Even though chapter 12, verse 10, God holds life in his hands. He holds the breath of all of mankind. It's all his. Right? Thomas has been teaching us about the book of Genesis. Who created everything? God. Who owns everything? God. Which means he can do whatever he wants with his creation, right? Does he not have that right? And that is the answer. Chapter 13, verse 15, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Nevertheless, I will argue my ways before him, for a godless, this also will be my salvation, for a godless man may not come before his presence. I'm not a sinner, I'm a godly man, I should have the right to come before him and argue my case. So you're all wrong, only God really knows, and hopefully, I will get to speak to him. Chapter 15, Here's the second cycle of debates. And this is Eliphaz again, and the argument here is an accusation. He says, you're rejecting wisdom and you're being presumptuous. Right? Verse 14 in particular, what is man that he should be pure, or he who is born of a woman that he should be righteous? Behold, he puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not pure in his sight. How much less one who is detestable and corrupt, man who drinks iniquity like water. So listen, Job, you are rejecting God, and you're being presumptuous about the fact that you are somehow innocent and righteous and not detestable and corrupt like the rest of mankind. And so Job answers in chapter 16, he appeals to God, and he says, my accusers are unjust. Verse 17, there is no violence in my hand, and my prayer is pure. Verse 21, oh, that a man might plead with God as a man with his neighbor. I should get an audience with the Almighty. And then chapter 18, Job is suffering what he deserves. This is what Bildad says to him. You're suffering what you deserve. And Job's response to Bildad, chapter 19, verse 3, is to cry out to God for pity. 10 times you have insulted me. You are not ashamed to wrong me. Even if I have truly erred, my error lodges with me. So he's, verse 7, I cry violence, but I get no answer. I shout for help, but there is no justice. So he's crying out to God, because his companions are not much help, right? All they're doing is accusing him, they're slandering him, they're attributing sin to him, and he knows he hasn't sinned, and so, he's trying to understand, trying to get some wisdom, but his friends are really no help. Chapter 19, verse 25, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will take his stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God, whom I myself shall behold, and whom my eyes will see, and not another. My heart faints within me. What is that talking about, do you think? Yeah, it seems to be talking about the resurrection, right? My skin is going to decay, but from my flesh, I'm going to see God. Right? I know that my Redeemer lives. Chapter 20, this is Zophar's second speech. And he accuses Job of rejecting God by questioning his justice. So again, you've sinned, God is just, so you're getting what you deserve. That's the logic. And chapter 21, Job's response to Zophar, you are completely out of touch with reality. So that ends the second cycle of debates. And then the third cycle, now it's just open accusation of sin. Now they're just saying, in Eliphaz's third speech here in chapter 22, he denounces Job's criticism of God's justice. Now Now you're in sin because you're denouncing God's justice in your life. God is a just God, and He's brought these penalties into your life because of your sin, or this discipline into your life. And so now you're criticizing God's justice, so you are sinning. There you go, right? And Job's response to him is God knows he is not guilty, yet in his providence and for his purposes, he allows temporary success of the wicked. Right? That's his response all the way through the end of chapter 24. In his providence and for his purposes, he allows the wicked to prosper for some reason. So Bildad's third speech in chapter 25, he scoffs at Job's direct appeal to God. So he's belittling Job now. He's scoffing at him. Verse 4 of chapter 25, how then can a man be just with God? How can he be clean who is born of a woman? Are you kidding? There's no way you can be righteous before God. So he's scoffing at Job. Chapter 26, Job's response to Bildad again. God is indeed perfectly wise and sovereign, but it's not as simplistic as they thought. The answer is not that easy. God is perfectly wise, and he is sovereign, but that's not necessarily the answer. In all situations, we don't know what God is doing. We still don't. So the final defense of Job comes in chapter 27, and this is where he sort of crosses the line. And he says in verse 6, I hold fast my righteousness, and I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days. Right? That sounds a little bit too strong, right? You were born of a woman, you are a sinner, you do sin. 1 John, right? If we say we have no sin, we make God a liar, and we make his word a lie, right? There's no truth in us if we say we've never sinned. So he sort of affirms his own righteousness and that man can't discover God's wisdom. God is doing something and we can't know what he's doing. And this is a monologue, and Job defends his own righteousness, and then chapter 28, as I said, is the center of the book. And 28:28 is kind of a key here. Behold, the fear of the Lord that is wisdom. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Look back up at verses 12 and 13. Where can wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. No matter how hard you try, there is some wisdom that lies with God that you cannot discover. It is not found here. We cannot know it. Chapter 29, Job's final defense. This is his second monologue, and I'm just going to move along. Second monologue, Job defends his innocence, and he asks God to defend him. And then chapter 32, Elihu intervenes, the Buzite, and his anger burns against Job because Job justified himself before God. See, it's one thing to be declared righteous by God, it's another thing to declare yourself righteous before God. It's a big difference. And so Elihu enters in to sort of break the impasse here. And he gives 4 different speeches. And chapter 33, verse 1 starts his first speech. And so he rebukes Job, or charges him for the presumption in criticizing God. It's very presumptuous to criticize God. And secondly, failing to recognize God may have a loving purpose in allowing you to suffer. Right? Nobody has hit that nail yet. God may actually have a loving purpose in all of this, Job. You don't know. 33:12, you are not right in this, for God is greater than man. Why do you complain against him that he does not give an account of all his doings? You got no right to question him. Verse 29, behold, God does all these oftentimes with men to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. That's a pretty significant purpose, that God may be using these tragedies, right? All of this suffering may be to the end of rescuing your soul in the long run. Chapter 34, this is the second of 4 speeches. Elihu again rebukes Job, and he says that Job has impugned God's integrity by claiming that it does not pay to lead a godly life. Right? The Almighty will not pervert justice, verse 12. Were it not for God, all flesh would perish, verse 15. God has a right to do with his creation what he wants. He does not pervert justice. Chapter 35. This is the third of 4 speeches. Elihu urges Job to wait patiently upon the Lord. Wait. You don't know what God's doing. Sometimes you need to wait in prayer and seeking God and see what his purposes are. And then the 4th speech, chapter 36, Elihu believes that God is disciplining Job for some purpose. This is discipline, and discipline is different than punishment. Punishment is for something you've done wrong. Discipline is for training in righteousness. So Elihu argues that human observation can hardly expect to understand God's dealings in administering justice and mercy. So we can look at the situation, but it's not going to give you any clue as to God's dealings. God deals in justice and mercy, and we have no idea what he's doing, or how he's doing it, or what he's using to bring it about. It's all a big question mark for us because we just don't know. Again, chapters 1 and 2 all happen up there in the heavenly realm, and Job has no idea what decisions are being made that are going to affect his life. And so chapter 38, the deliverance. God intervenes, right? God interrupts Job, and here's his response. God answers Job out of the whirlwind, and he says, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" He says, "Gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. And then he goes through this long list of sit down and shut up, right? These questions that basically tell Job that he doesn't know anything. Verse 36, just pull this out. Who has put wisdom in the innermost being or given understanding to the mind? Right? You don't have any idea, Job, what I'm doing. You're not God. I'm God. So sit down and shut up and listen. Job answers God, chapter 40, verses 3 to 5. And here's his answer. Behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. It's kind of like, oh, never mind. Right? Once I have spoken, and I will not answer, even twice, and I will add nothing more. And then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Or will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? Who are you to put my judgments under scrutiny? I'm God, right? He says, I'm God, and you're not. And blaming me or condemning me for what's going on in your life is not going to make you righteous in my eyes. Verse 10, no one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. Right? I can't be bribed. It all belongs to me, and I do what I want with it. So chapter 42, Job answers the Lord and says, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So Job passes judgment on himself here, verses 5 and 6. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you, therefore I retract. I take it back, and I repent in dust and ashes. I was wrong. I was wrong to question you, Lord, and I take it back. Please forgive me. Right? Nobody can ward off your hand. Nobody can change your purpose. You do what you want, and I'm okay with that. So then God turns the gun on these three counselors, verses 7 and 9 of chapter 42. And he says, verse 8, therefore take for yourselves 7 bulls, 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves, and my servant Job will pray for you. For I will accept him so that I may not do with you according to your folly, because you have spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. You have not spoken of me, You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So it's a slap down, it's a rebuke of his 3 friends. And then chapter 42, verses 10 through 17, then the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. So he was rich before all of this tragedy, but through all of this, now he is doubly blessed. And in verse 12, the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had an additional 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he multiplied his livestock. And Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his grandsons 4 generations. And Job died an old man and full of days. So God prospered him in the end, right? He paid him back double for all of this. But we still don't have an answer as to why it all happened. Yeah. 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 Yeah, there's a book out there. What you're saying reminds me of a book. It's called The Brokenhearted Evangelist. And it's based on Psalm 51. Isn't that what it is, Thomas? Yeah. It follows David, and David's sin with Bathsheba, obviously, and having her husband killed. But it's his repentance, and he goes from repentance to the end of Psalm 51, where he's actually wanting to tell other people about God's mercy and forgiveness and grace. It's called The Brokenhearted Evangelist. And that's kind of what Job reminds me of, really. He's had his heart broken. He's been raked over the coals. And he doesn't know why, and he'll never know why. And in the end, his fortunes are doubled. But if God had not doubled his fortunes, would God still be a good God? Absolutely, because God was using this suffering for a purpose in Job's life. We just don't know what that purpose was, other than to grow him in godliness and to expose an area of his life that needed exposure so that he could repent of it. Yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Satan's accusation in the beginning was sort of proved along the way, right? That you take everything from the man, and what's going to happen? You know, it's going to expose him, and he'll curse you. But Job never does curse God. He ends up retracting, even though he kind of, for a while, impugns God and sort of bolsters his own righteousness. In the end, he realizes God is righteous, and he's doing things and disciplining me for his purposes that I don't have any idea. And it just leads me to believe that there are areas in our lives, in our hearts, that we are completely unaware of that need dealing with, right? Because we're a work in progress. And so tragedy may come in your life. Difficult days are ahead. But God is at work, right? And you don't know what God is doing. So the book of Job, Lord willing, will help you seek wisdom along the way. Not to know why you're suffering, but to know how to endure it with patience, right? All right, well, let me pray and I'll release you.